In the previous video, I had spoken about my father's habit of ridiculing, humiliating the family in general, and I'm now going to talk about another aspect of his psychological abuse, namely his lies. Most people don't think of lies as being abusive, certainly, but I think that the examples I'm going to provide can lend support to that idea. I remember that one of the earliest lies my father told was when I was getting into a car and I knew I was car sick, and I told my parents that, and my father immediately said to me that I'm not really car sick, that this is just something that my paternal grandfather had put into my head. Now, I had never spoken to my paternal grandfather about this at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure my father had no way of knowing whether or not that my paternal grandfather had said anything of the kind, but nevertheless, this was my father's way of shrugging off my problems. By contrast, he was a hypochondriac. He feigned heart attacks. What he did was he would just place his hand over his heart and go, my heart. And when my mother came and saw him this way, she asked whether there was anything she could do, very sweetly, very sympathetically, and he replied, sugar. And my mother went to the kitchen, got some sugar for him, came back and spoon-fed him that sugar, and so that's how my father got the attention that he craved. Interestingly, when I asked him, Daddy, do you want to call an ambulance? Rather, do you want me to call an ambulance? He said, no, it's okay, just sugar. So, he lied in order to get his needs met. He also lied in order to attempt to isolate me. For example, there was this bus trip that took place, organized by my school, and I asked my father whether I could go, and he said, no, don't go on this bus trip because several years ago buses had been overturned on the highway and I'm concerned for your safety. There was also a time when I wanted to go outside and play, and my father said, don't go outside, there are thieves outside. Now, the biggest problem with this sort of lie is that a small child might actually believe it, and I did believe it for quite a while. Nevertheless, as these lies, as a number built up over time, I saw reality for what it was and managed to become immune to them. One lie to which I had already become immune by the time my father said it was that there was an earthquake taking place. We were all at the dinner table, and my father looked up to the chandelier and claimed that he felt it had moved. It had been moving a bit. I looked up, there was no movement, and he asked us all to go outside of the house and wait for a few minutes, so we all, including him, went outside, and there was no one there waiting alongside us. There were just a few people walking around and doing their chores. He lied about everyone else's eating habits. Basically, when I mentioned that I would like to go on a diet, that I would like to lose weight because I was very fat, my father told me that I wasn't fat, that everyone else was malnourished. And having known people who were quite muscular at school, that was of course a complete lie, and I knew it. I think at this point I didn't so much believe in his lies as just accepted them as indication that he disapproved of something. And he also lied about other people's spending habits because he was very grandiose in getting us to buy sunflower seeds and Coca-Cola, and this was his perception of affluence. When I mentioned this, he replied that other people are just starving themselves in order to afford expensive furniture that they can show off to others, which, as far as I can tell, having visited a few people, wasn't true. He lied lied to cover his tracks as well. So when I was very small, my father used to beat me, as I mentioned, and I think as a consequence of that, I had this way of playing with a little plush panda that was about this big, as big as my index finger. Basically, I had this stapler, well, the device that's similar to a stapler, I'm not sure what it's called in English, and I used that in order to remove the panda's head. My father saw this and he came over and asked me why I'd done that. He wasn't being hostile actually, he looked concerned and he kind of showed, possibly feigned, disappointment over the panda. He asked me why I'd done this, and I said I had done this because he had been bad. That was the first thing that came to mind. I didn't really know why I had done that, I just gave an answer. So my father asked me, well, do I ever do this to you when you're bad? And of course he had done this to me a lot of times. But by asking me this question, it was his way of covering up for himself. And my father tried to cover up for himself in many ways. To give another example, when I was at university as an undergraduate, he told me that really he is surprised how little time he spent with us, how he was always absent. In fact, my father was always over-intrusive. And he repeated that to a person in my presence, to an acquaintance, who didn't seem to disbelieve him, though I'm hoping that the person did. Well, he really made a very, very crude effort to cover his tracks and to deny everything when I came back to Romania. And I started, in the midst of the conversation, to talk to him about what he had done to us as a family, how he had abused us. I had thought at that time that I might be able to persuade him to become a better person, to apologize for everything, and to just take part in rebuilding the family, which was extremely naive of me. People like him do not get better, they do not learn from their mistakes, they don't see them as mistakes, they don't apologize, they don't feel guilt or shame or sorrow, they just deny, and that's what he did. He first said that he was really, really surprised and disturbed by the fact that I had suddenly changed the topic of the conversation, and how it's not normal, in his opinion, to change conversation topics so quickly. And then he went on to mention that if I had known him, I would have known that he forgets everything after about 2 years. He just has a very poor memory, that's what he said. And then I pointed out how he had done something abusive 1 year ago, 1 year before, and he denied that as well, of course. So then, having denied all these things, he said again that it was really, really odd and inappropriate of me to change the topic of conversation all of a sudden. Trying to brush everything off like that was really insulting of him, and I guess it shows the void that he carries instead of a spirit. I just stared into the depths of evil when he said that to me. It was a very peculiar experience. To get back to all the other things my father said, I might have mentioned Canada. My father lied to us all about us going to Canada someday, and that was when I was in school. Everyone in Romania has this ideal of leaving Romania and going to somewhere better, supposedly. Well, there's a lot to talk about that cultural aspect, but that's what my mother wanted, I think. That's what my father claimed he wanted, and he just stringed us on. Well, my mother didn't seem to actually believe him. She told me that I shouldn't really think about it, I shouldn't really be bothered by it. I shouldn't mind my father's promise to go to America and to go to Canada. He also suggested America as a potential target. And I did believe him for a few years, but as with all things, I became immune to such lies. He lied about my mother, about why he had married her, to aggrandize himself. Basically, he had said, my mother was schizophrenic at that time, that he had married her because she was beautiful. Now, in fact, he had married her because her parents were influential and rich, even though, to my understanding, they didn't stay rich after getting married. As in, not my maternal grandparents, my mother and my father didn't get rich because of the marriage. My father certainly didn't. I had seen pictures of my mother at their wedding, and she wasn't beautiful. She was very thin, and she looked, I guess, odd. It showed that she was very anxious and, I guess, disturbed in a way that even she couldn't understand. She looked strange, and I think it was because of the abuse she had experienced, because of her own parents' actions. So my father, he also lied to aggrandize himself about his heritage. He claimed that his great-grandparents were very rich entrepreneurs in Armenia or in Turkey, well, in the Ottoman Empire, but that because of the Armenian genocide, his family lost its possessions. And I know that my grandparents were originally from Turkey, but I really don't believe my father had any way of knowing this, what his great-grandparents did. And he really lied about his opportunities in life. He lied about the possibility of going to Brown University. He said that the reason why he stayed in Romania instead of going to America, Canada, I'm not sure where Brown University is, was because my mother had told him she wanted to stay. That was a complete lie as well. And what he said to me was that he had been given an opportunity to teach at Brown University as a full professor. Now, back then, he had not even finished his PhD thesis. In fact, it took my father 10 years to finish his PhD thesis, I think. Well, certainly a very long time. So, he just lied in order to create the impression that he was a better person, or rather more influential, successful, I guess, person than he really was. And to go closer to the present time, recently when I came back to Romania, my father lied about having been called by a lot of people to my face for having been called with good wishes for New Year's Eve and for Christmas. And I know that in previous years, 1996 to 2004, I guess, he had gotten a lot of gifts from businessmen and a lot of good wishes. Now he didn't get any. He just got one call recently, which I think was a really nice thing, that he didn't get so many calls, and he just lied about that, completely contradicting the truth that was right in front of me. My father got angry when I confronted him about his lies. For example, when I confronted him about his income, because I knew that he was probably making more than he claimed to make. And at that point he just got angry and told me to look up his income on a website, his salary rather, when that didn't cover what he made in his other job, I guess. Basically, I've told a lot of lies, and there are a lot more to talk about. I've told a lot of lies, I've told a lot of his lies, and there are a lot more to talk about. So I'm just going to leave it here anyway, because my time is running out for the YouTube video. And in the next section I'm going to be talking about my father's way of playing the victim.